Hey folks, welcome to episode 5 of the Deeply Devoted podcast, a ministry of the E-Free Church of Bemidji, Minnesota. My name is Eric, and I'm one of the pastors on staff here at E-Free Bemidji, and today on the podcast, we are talking about worship music. Really, our topic is what makes a good worship song. And as I was thinking about this topic a little bit, I've got just a little bit of experience leading worship music. But with me today is one of our resident experts on the topic. My guest today is Jason Robeck. He is our 1045 Contemporary Music Director. So Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. This is exciting. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's something different. We're still figuring this out. I really should ask Jason, are you ready to rock?
Yes,
that's what we're going to do here. So, yeah. Well, I think it would be good to just start with getting to know you. What's nice about this podcast is it's for our church family. Mm-hmm. And so whether you've been a part of our church for a long time or somebody's listening to this 6 months from now, they can come back and listen to these and get to know you. So, Jason, you've been part of the E-Free Bemidji Church here for a few years now, I think.
Yep.
Love to just hear a little bit of your story of what brought you and your family to Bemidji and to this church.
Well, God brought us here. We were in ministry, and God called us to another job, actually into insurance now, but that's why we came to Bemidji, got a job here, and we moved here, landed, and started going to some different churches, and actually it's funny how we started coming here was maybe about a year after we'd been here in Bemidji. Randomly, out of the blue, my old youth pastor called me. I hadn't talked to him in 25 years. And he was really the reason I went into ministry in the first place, was because of this youth pastor. First time I'd heard from him in 25 years, he said, "Hey, where you living?" And I said, I'm in Bemidji. He said, "No way. I'm coming to Bemidji this weekend for a wedding at E-Free."
Okay.
And my best friend is the pastor there. You know, you should go visit there. And we actually met up at a restaurant, and he said, "Yeah, you should visit. My best friend is the pastor there, Jerry's." And so we came, and we actually met Jerry's wife, and we loved it. And so we've been here ever since. That was like 3 years ago.
It's hard. I'm trying to think back. Maybe the last time I did an interview with Jason was when I interviewed him for the position, and it feels like it's more than 2. It's probably more than 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And time really flies, and it feels like you guys have been here, maybe not forever, but for a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah. Well, so we are talking about music. We're talking about worship music. And Jason, you are a musician, but I'm curious, have you always been a musician? Have you had that musical bone in your body for a while? And maybe just tell us a little bit, when did you discover your love for even singing and playing music?
Yes, I've always been a musician. The farthest back I can remember was my dad and I did some sort of church musical, or I don't even know. I was really young, and we did a duet for church. I think it was probably like a Christmas, play or something like that. And I'd always, in elementary school, started playing saxophone, played alto sax all the way up through, high school. Started, doing more singing, and I started playing guitar when I was 13. Started writing music. Yeah, so I've always loved playing. Kind of shifted more into just guitar is my main thing.
So we're not going to have alto sax in one of our worship sets one of these times?
I actually sold my alto sax.
That's too bad.
To buy my wedding ring for my wife.
Okay, well that's good. That's good.
That was it was a good trade. Yeah. That was worth it. But
I played tenor sax in middle school and high school, and I don't have it anymore. And there's times where I wish, or if I'm at a music store and they've got a used one, where I thought, man, that would be fun to just see if I could still do it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't plan on playing in
They
a
burn
jazz
those
band.
scales into your head, don't they?
Yes.
But it's hard to sing and play saxophone.
That's true.
So it was
true.
just
Maybe the guitar is a better.
It was a better
fit. Yeah. Maybe a little bit different question. So not just your musical side, but what role has music really played in your own relationship with Christ? How do you see music fitting into your own personal discipleship?
It has played a big part. Not just in the, there's, when I was a young teenager, stumbling across, DC Talk and Jars of Clay.
Nice.
That's like my era. Was huge. It really was, and that kind of started my my love for writing music. We'll talk about that later, I think.
Yeah.
But really, church music, hymns. I grew up in it was a traditional church, and so hymns and contemporary music really. I think that there's a reason that there's a whole section of the Bible on music.
Yeah.
I think it's an expression of our love for God, and really can deepen our theology if we're listening to the right kind of Christian music. But yeah.
Well, that's kind of the tough topic, is the right kind of Christian music. I mean, even referencing some of those early contemporary artists, no offense to Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant and Sandy Patty, but when some of those groups came along in kind of the early 90s and really brought some skill to Christian music, that really opened things up for a lot of people. And I'm sure, like anything else, there's some that are better than others, and some of those bands had to make some hard choices along the way for radio play or not to be on the radio and things like that. But but on a local church level, that question is still relevant. Well, what makes good Christian music? And whether we're talking about newer music or older music, you can't always just assume that everything in your hymnal is great.
Right.
Nor can you assume that everything that is written more recently is great. And I don't mean just quality of music, but does this work? And on any given Sunday, we have two services. And in those services, both services, our traditional service, our contemporary service, we usually sing about 4 or 5 songs or 4 or 5 pieces of music. Now, there are literally hundreds, probably thousands of hymns written, at least in English, over the years, not to mention just a giant contemporary music catalog. How do you, Jason, go about selecting music each and every week for corporate worship?
That is a mixture of things, because when we're picking music for congregational, I mean, that's the important word there, that congregational or corporate worship, that is an important factor. As a worship leader, in the selection of those songs, we're taking into account multiple things, and we're to get straight to the point, I guess, is that when I'm selecting music, I think it's important we first ask God, what do you want? What do you want? Because it's true. We're leading. We have a congregation. We have to think about the genres and things like that. But really, in the end, who are we singing to? We're singing to Jesus, and we say it. We say, "Oh, we're singing to an audience of one." But sometimes I wonder, do we really consider that in our song selection? What songs do you want to hear, Jesus? So I do ask that question. I try to be prayerful in it. Now, I don't always get a audible voice from heaven, we should sing this song, But I think it's important to ask him that question because that puts it at the front of our mind that we're not doing a concert here. We're not simply selecting songs because I like this song or it's new or what would people want to hear. Really, that should be very much secondary in our thinking. And like we were saying, picking songs that are biblical.
Yeah.
So just because a new song comes out and everyone likes it, you like the sound of it, you got to listen to those lyrics because they are teaching you something.
Yeah.
They are expressing something that we're proclaiming. Yeah. We're saying, I believe this. I'm saying this about you, God, and about what I believe. And so it's really important we say, do I really believe this? Is this biblical? And then from that point we go, what's the genre? How does it fit in the flow of music? I don't want to do a slow song and then a fast song and a slow song, like that sort of thing. But, I have, over the years, you compile a big old stack of music and you try to find new ones. But it is a process that I do very prayerfully.
Yeah. And it's funny how music works, especially music on a Sunday morning. Even as someone who preaches on occasion, by Wednesday, Thursday, I'll have a hard time remembering what the passage was, or certainly what the points were. No offense to the preacher, because sometimes it's even the sermon that I just preached, but I'll still be humming that song from one of our services well into the week.
It's weird how music does that.
And it just kind of sticks in your head. And especially if the theme is something that's resonating with you too. Yep. We'll talk in a second a little bit more about just the impact of how worship music teaches. Yep. But just thinking through all of those elements. Now, I suppose it doesn't help too. We've thrown some curveballs at you every once in a while when we have some really strange topic on a Sunday morning, and we say, Jason,
minor prophets.
Yeah, can you come up with 4 or 5 songs that we can sing about God's wrath?
God's wrath. That was a good Sunday.
Or just even some tough topics of cultural issues or social issues. It's tough to know. Do all these songs need to fit?
To fit?
Yeah.
I've been in situations where, I've been leading worship since I was like 14 in churches, and I don't always know what the message is. Yeah. So here you do let us know, we plan ahead. And I try to definitely take that into account, but really, you can't always select songs that, and it's probably not a necessarily a good idea. Just always select songs that match every little portion of it. But really, I think that prayerful approach to it and saying, what do I feel the tone of this message will probably be, and what's the tone of the set so far? And sometimes we don't do it perfect, but.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that's the end of goal is to say, all of those songs fit
lined
so,
up so perfectly.
Well. I remember early on in ministry when I was a solo pastor and I had a hand in helping pick songs on a Sunday morning, and say if we, the message was on hope, I would try to find songs where the word hope was in every at least showed up in one verse or even in the title, and then I realized that really feels artificial, and if it doesn't flow well, you're actually going the wrong direction there.
Yeah, you're just kind of forcing it, and that's definitely something I don't like to do is to force it. But you probably don't want to talk about the opposite topic is the main thing,
right?
Like
and being
we're preaching on one thing and we're talking
culturally aware,
on the other one.
Maybe just choosy on this particular Sunday, and which is true of preaching. If it's the Christmas season and we pick something radically different, it's going to feel strange. Yeah. Well, and then we have challenges, good challenges, I think. But this summer, we had our combined services.
Yep.
So we took both our traditional 8:30 service and our 10:45 contemporary service, and we squished them into one 9:30 service. And throughout the summer, you were working very closely with Laura Engelstead, our worship committee chair. And Laura is someone that oversees a lot of our traditional service planning. Jason, what was that like to select music each and every week, now with an even broader spectrum of musical tastes and just even familiarity?
Well, working with Laura was really, really amazing. She's very awesome. I think we have a very similar heart in our approach to asking those same sort of questions. What are we trying to accomplish? And I think one of the things is the philosophy of worship is approaching it and saying, like, what are we really trying to accomplish? Yes, we have these two services that are different genres, but in the end, we're worshiping.
Yeah.
In the end, we're worshiping. And like I said, I grew up in a more traditional sort of church, so I grew up with hymns, and so I have no real bias. I guess I'd say I prefer contemporary, but so for me, the stretch to add more hymns was not a big stretch for me. But I think it's one of the things we kept saying is it's okay to experience other people's preferences. Yeah. And so we tried to mix it in there and say, how can we split the line as far as genres is concerned, but communicate the heart behind it. It's okay for you to have your own favorite kind of music.
Yes.
Your favorite genre, your favorite artists, your favorite instrumentation. But in the end, it's really not. Worship is not about us. It's not about us. Yeah. And so if I can't worship to a particular genre, I would, respectfully challenge that's a me issue. Yeah. And so a person's ability to worship to a genre that is not something they're used to really is, I think, spiritually good for them to stretch themselves and say, I'm not used to hearing organ, or I'm not used to hearing drums or electric guitar, but I can still get behind the message because it is biblical, and we have the leadership has thought through what songs they've selected, and I can trust, even if I don't like that it's louder or whatever, that the words are going to be glorifying to Jesus. Yeah. So it was a good process, and I really did enjoy it. But it was sometimes a challenge.
It can be a stretch. If anything, just if this song is completely familiar to 50% of our congregation, now you have to be intentional about introducing it and teaching it, and not just saying, "Boy, I hope you really like this," but the goal here is to sing together, and in a manner that's offering offering up our worship, offering up our praise. Yeah, and that could be a challenge.
Well, I think there is something special about new music, because sometimes songs become too familiar to us. Yeah. And we just sing them and we don't think about them. But then when there's a new song, we have to really go, what are these words? Do I really mean this? And then it can hit us in a new way. And I think even, no matter which direction you're coming from, that can be definitely true.
Yeah. I found that especially when it comes to Christmas music. I know it's September and we don't want to start thinking about Advent season just yet, but I have just been blessed in recent years by different artists who will take, say, a Christmas hymn and maybe rework a couple of the lyrics. They'll keep the chorus or they'll keep the first two verses, but they'll take that familiar tune and add some things to it. And what I like about it is it forces me to stop and think about what I'm singing of. Right. Especially Christmas songs that I've learned since I was a kid and have been singing for every year. Yeah. It's
fun when the lyrics are taken, but the tune is changed, because then you're like, where did I hear this before? Like, it hits you new because you don't recognize the tune, and then you have to focus on those words.
Yeah.
So.
Hopefully it draws you in a little bit there. Yeah. But there is a teaching ministry that happens with corporate singing. You know, we use that word worship interchangeably. Sometimes when we talk about corporate worship, we mean singing, and but really we should mean everything that takes place when we gather on a Sunday. But in this context, when we're talking about corporate singing or worship music, typically we think about teaching in terms of the sermon. So if what did you learn on Sunday, or how were you impacted by God's word on Sunday? You'll probably think about the sermon. But I always go back to a verse like Colossians 3:16. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. Jason, what do you think the role, what role do you think these songs that we sing on Sunday morning, they play in discipling God's people?
Yeah, I thought this was a really good question. You sent me this, and I was looking it over, and I was like, "Wow, you're right." You know, I'll often talk about that other side of the coin you mentioned, which is like, the word is worship, but song is teaching.
Yes.
I think it's super important that we understand that what we sing is an expression of what we believe, and so when we pick songs, they need to be biblical. They need to express what Scripture says. So, I don't think that a song needs to always just quote directly from Scripture to be biblical. Right. The concepts, the what it's teaching about God, what it's teaching you about the world, about yourself, needs to be biblical. So it plays an interesting role because I think sometimes we can be preached at from the pulpit, and it just doesn't hit us. We just don't get it. We hear it 1,000 times and we just don't get it. But then we sing it. And like you were saying, it bypasses, there's something about music that bypasses the brain and goes right to the heart sometimes.
Yeah, good way to say that, yeah.
That, you could take someone who's just this hard-hearted person and you could tell them, something about, and they'll just, but then they're just crying during worship because something cuts through. And, I think it's important that we're careful about that when we're like engaging emotions.
Yeah. But
there's a reality to it. We have King David with his Psalms, that is teaching us. That is in the Word. You can't get around the reality that there's something about music that is very, very important in that aspect. And I know that we can utilize it either positive or negative in that regard. Sometimes if we're not careful, we're learning things that we don't realize that are wrong.
Right.
And I won't go into too many like lyrics that I've discovered before, but I think it's really important that we note those things. So
and whether it's an old song or a new song, that can be true. Every once in a while, especially on our Sunday services with our lyrics projected, I'll be reading the lyrics, and there'll be times when I'll think, that's an interesting way to say that.
Right.
I know what verse that's alluding to or that theological concept. I wonder if I would have said it that way, or if the artist is being a little more poetic in that. And that is the challenge. You're talking about that emotional. There is an emotion in worship music. Yep. I mean, worship should stir our emotions. If you read the Psalms, you see all kinds of emotive language about shouting and declaring and weeping. And, I can probably think of a whole lot of other examples. And yet, we never want to be manipulative in that.
Right.
And that, I think, is a hard thing of when I leave on a Sunday morning and I say, boy, I don't really feel like I worshiped today.
There can be in the danger, and is that if we get too much about that, then like I didn't worship today. What would I mean? What do I mean by that?
Right.
if what I mean is that I don't feel my emotions engaged, then maybe we've crossed the line there on a personal level, saying that's how I measure if I've worshiped or not. And when worship really is not, worship is that expression of love and that crying out to God, whether or not we feel anything. The reciprocation, I think, can be overemphasized. Worship can happen even if I don't get anything out of it.
Yeah. And boy, we could talk for hours on some of those things and just thinking through that whole. I don't even like the phrase worship experience,
right.
And yet that's part of it. Is what goes on in the 65 minutes that we have on a Sunday, and really, how does that spill over into when I get into my car and head home and go into my whole new week there? Yeah. Well, boy, I think just even, I can't remember if it was this last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago, Jason, you were sharing with us one of your own songs, a song that you've written. You've shared a few songs of yours with us, and boy, they have become ours, which is really kind of interesting. I don't know what that feels like to be on the other side of the microphone and the guitar that way, but how do you go about writing new music? And this is a little bit of a softball question here, Jason, but are you working on any new songs currently?
That is a leading. I am working on a new song, but we'll get there in a second.
Okay.
This is a hard topic because how do I write new music? Yes, I do. I've written a lot of music. I do feel like it's a gift that God's given me, and I try to use it for His glory. But really, people always ask me, do you start with the music and then do the lyrics, or do you start with the lyrics and then do the music?
I think I asked you that
the
other day.
You asked me that, and I had someone else ask me it. I do start with the music.
Okay.
And I understand why people would say you should start with the lyrics because that's the most important. We're talking about God; it needs to be theological. But I also think that it's important that we understand that what comes out of you as a songwriter is going to be what's in you. So if you have bad theology, it doesn't matter if you started with the lyrics or ended with them.
Right.
Bad theology is going to come out.
Right.
So I do start with the music because, after all, it's music that I'm writing. I'm not writing a book. Yeah. I'm not writing a thesis
or a poem.
Right. I've done those things. I've written books and written theses and all those things, and it's like, okay, that's great. I know that a lot of old-time theologians were songwriters, but we don't sing their songs. Why? Because they sound more like a dissertation than a song. And so I think you do have to start with the music. That's so I do start with just trying to find something that sounds, that's nice, that's melodic. If I don't like it, I throw it out, and I just I go from there. But then it's always fun to see it kind of take shape. I do, very prayerfully, and as it takes shape, I don't approach it with an agenda. On most of the time, I have no agenda. I have no topic, nothing, no point I'm wanting to get across. In fact, that really bugs me when I hear a song that I feel is like they're really trying to just, get a point across.
Yeah.
I just like to see it, and I just say, start worshiping and start saying, things that I believe about God, that I love about God, or things that I'm going through, and then it just kind of grows and expands from there. So. So most of the time that's kind of how it goes, and I try. You learn ways of doing things, and
I would think that would be a little challenging. I've played guitar for a little while and only know a handful of chords, but I would worry that I'd be noodling around and come up with this great chord progression, and then realize, oh, wait, that's a Beatles song.
That's I heard on the radio.
Yeah, wait, somebody else did that one.
I've had a few
I
of
better
those.
not do that and get sued by,
There's a few songs I was like, what am I hearing here? Then years later, I was like, oh, I stole that one. Oops.
I suppose there's only so many 4-chord songs that are patterns that you can have.
Yeah.
So,
And sometimes you get writer's block, and then you're like, oh, what do I do? But
right.
Yes, I am writing a new song.
Okay.
We are having the 100-year anniversary coming up. Mm-hmm. And so I had this thought, well, what if I write a song for it?
Yeah.
And so I came to you guys and I said, what do you think about this idea? And you said, yeah, that's great, go for it. And so I asked a few questions like, what do you think would be, so we've recently, rolled out some new, what's the term for it?
Our discipleship pathway.
Discipleship pathway and all of that. And so, I'm writing a song that has some of that language in there and using, the core values, the vision, mission of the church. And I'm liking what it is so far. I've shared it with a few people from the worship team, and we're going to hopefully, I got a chorus and a few verses. So I'm excited about it, and we hope to have it ready for before middle of October.
Okay. Well, clock's ticking a little bit there, but that'll be fun to just see how that comes together. I think about that, some of these big churches that have these big professional worship bands, and they're churning out albums yearly of 15 new songs that they wrote for their church. I can't imagine that. I'm glad because, I listened to some of that music, and they're really some neat songs, and we've introduced some of those songs into our own corporate worship setting, but one at a time, maybe, right? We'll just focus on this one
at a time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But I like the collaboration of it too. Mm-hmm. So I think I'd love to do more of that.
Okay. There we go. There we go. If you write the music, maybe somebody else can help get some lyrics and see how they come together. Yeah.
I've done that a few times, and I love it. I think it's really good for a church too. So
that would be neat. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I like to do so far on this podcast is totally change the topic. We've been talking about worship music, but this is the Deeply Devoted podcast. One of the things we say around here all the time is that we are becoming deeply devoted followers of Jesus together. So, Jason, I wanted to ask you, what is one thing lately that has been blessing you that is deepening your devotion to Jesus? Maybe it is a song, or maybe it's a book you're reading, or an experience you've had, or something like that. Just something lately that as you reflect on that, is deepening your devotion to Jesus.
Yeah. There have been a few messages lately. So the messages here at church, we've been going through the minor prophets. Mm-hmm. And we just shifted a little bit recently, but the minor prophets. And that there were some really powerful things that got me thinking about my devotion and my devotions, specifically my time in the Word. And I can't remember exactly which message it was, but I was very convicted. I just thought to myself, you got to get in the Word. I get so busy that I just don't make time for it like I should. And so been working that into my life more. We've been reading the Bible together as a family in the evening, doing some Bible memorizing just in the last few months. So that has been really awesome.
Yeah.
To see the family do that and myself really digging into the Word more. So
it's fun to hear. We did 4 of the minor prophets this summer, 4 of the 12, and I think we'll probably hit another 4 maybe next summer or at some point. But just hearing from a lot of people, boy, I haven't, other than Jonah, which is a familiar story. I've never spent any time in those books, and I was amazed what I got out of it. Unfortunately, they kind of have a tough reputation of some tough sledding.
I like those, though. I like tough topics, and we, like you said, it was hard to pick out songs for the wrath of God. But as far as a topic, like really being like, the justice and, the love of God actually insists that he must be just. And just really taking a fresh look at that again and saying, there's a reason Jesus had to die. This is a serious issue. There is justice that must be had, and that's because God is a God of love, a God of justice, but he's also a God of mercy, and then not taking that for granted. I think that might be one thing that, if you've been a Christian for a long time, it's easy to take that for granted. And that was one of the messages that came across. It might have been in the Jonah one that hit me, and I was like, am I taking the grace of God, his slowness to anger?
Yeah.
That was a few of the messages in those. Am I taking it for granted? Am I taking his patience with me for granted? So very powerful. That's been very powerful in my life lately. So
good. Well, I'm sure we could keep talking about worship music. There's a thought in my mind about maybe coming back another time about some of these tough topics in music. I mean, if you read through the Psalms, and how many of those Psalms are lament Psalms or difficult songs, and how many of those do we sing on a Sunday morning, or do our songs skew a direction? So we should probably come back to a subject like that. But it's been fun talking about worship music today with you, Jason. Jason, it's good to have you on our staff team. Thanks for being a part of not just our music ministry, but our church family. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Deeply Devoted podcast. Thanks for listening again this week. We'll have another episode next week. If you're listening to this through our church's webpage, you're probably found the YouTube link, but you can also find this podcast on a bunch of other platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you'll see a list of those on our church website. But join us again next week, and we'll keep this thing going. Thanks for listening.